Welcome to Mixie Veteran Stories, where forgotten promises, silent heroes, and moments of honor come back to life. Today's story begins not with fanfare, but with a quiet man on a quiet bench, waiting. Most walked past him. Some told him to leave. But what happened next turned one city park into hallowed ground and reminded everyone that some battles don't end when the war is over. This is the story of Walter Briggs and the bench that kept his promise. It was just another Tuesday in Millstone Park, children laughing by the fountain, joggers weaving through tree-lined paths, and sunlight painting the marble war memorial in gold. And on the far end of the park, beneath an old elm tree, sat a man most people didn't notice. His name was Walter Briggs, 83 years old. He wore a plain jacket with a faded Marine Corps patch and a cap that read, 2nd Recon, USMC. Every morning at 8 a.m., he took the same seat on the same bench. He brought no books, no radio, no coffee, just himself, and a small wooden box resting beside him. Some thought he was homeless, some thought he was senile, but Walter wasn't lost. He was exactly where he needed to be. The regulars at the park had grown used to his presence. The man with the straight back and faraway eyes. He never asked for money, never spoke unless spoken to. He simply sat, looking out toward the war memorial as if listening for names only he could hear. A few times, kids approached him, asking about his cap. Walter would smile politely and say, "It's not just a hat, it's a roll call." But most days, he sat in silence until the hour struck 3. Then he would gather his things, the box, the cap, the weight in his chest, and slowly walk away. He'd been doing this for weeks, maybe months, and no one knew why. One groundskeeper, a younger man named Kevin, once asked him directly, "Sir, do you wait for someone?" Walter nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm waiting for my unit. They're due back. July 15th. Kevin blinked. "Sir, July 15? You mean this year?" Walter looked him in the eye, unwavering. "Every 5 years, same spot. We made a promise, and I'm the keeper of it." Kevin didn't press, but the words stuck with him. As the days ticked down, some park officials began to grow uneasy. Complaints trickled in that the man was loitering, maybe scaring children. One officer even recommended removing him from the premises. But Walter didn't flinch. He'd survived jungles and ambushes and things that didn't have names. He wasn't about to leave a bench, not until July 15th. By July 10th, tension was rising. Not in Walter's chest, but in the city offices downtown. A new supervisor in Parks and Rec had received several complaints. Man in military gear sits all day, looks suspicious, scares the kids. One parent even accused him of staring at her son, though Walter had simply been gazing past him, lost in memory. And so, the pressure came. That afternoon, 2 city enforcement officers walked into the park. Neat uniforms, clipboards in hand, the kind of authority that carries more rule books than respect. They approached Walter, who, as always, was seated quietly under the elm, his cap low, his back straight. "Sir," one of them began, a little too loud, "we've received reports of loitering. We're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Walter didn't look up. "Public park, isn't it?" he asked, voice calm. "Yes, sir, it is," the younger one replied, trying to stay polite. "But occupying the same bench all day, every day, violates park policy, especially when complaints are filed." Walter turned his head slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just reached into the wooden box beside him and pulled out an old black and white photo. 12 young Marines, arms slung over each other's shoulders, mud on their boots, eyes like fire. The words, 2nd Recon, Khe-Sanh, 1969, scribbled at the bottom. Walter pointed. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's who made it home. The rest never left the hill. His hand trembled slightly, but his gaze was solid. "We promised each other. July 15th, every 5 years, right here." The officers shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, sir, but we still need to—" He interrupted gently. "You don't have to understand. You just have to let me wait." They hesitated. One of them whispered to the other. Then the older one sighed. "All right, sir. We'll give you a few more days. But after the 15th, this seat can't stay reserved." Walter gave a single nod. Fair enough. They left. But the story didn't. The young groundskeeper Kevin, who had overheard part of the exchange, posted about it that night. Just a few lines on a local forum. There's an old Marine who waits every day on the same bench. He's not homeless. He's not dangerous. He's keeping a promise. July 15th. Something tells me we'll all want to be there. At first, it got a few likes, then a dozen shares. By the end of the next day, local veterans groups began messaging each other. Anyone know this guy? Is this real? Should we show up? Meanwhile, Walter returned to the bench. Same time, same cap, same silence. But this time, someone left a coffee beside him. No note, just warmth in a cup. Someone else laid a small bouquet at the foot of the war memorial. And across the park, strangers started glancing his way. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Maybe even respect. Still, the city hadn't backed down. One more complaint, they warned, and Walter would be formally cited. But Walter, he stayed seated because some men fight with weapons, and some with patience, memory, and the weight of a promise no one else remembers. July 15th arrived quietly. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that turns shadows blue. By 8 o'clock a.m., Walter Briggs was already in his seat, just like he said he would be. His Marine cap was a little straighter that morning, his coat freshly brushed, and next to him, the wooden box, sealed now with a brass clasp. Inside, photographs, letters, and the name of every man he'd buried. The park was a little busier than usual. Some joggers slowed as they passed. A few people hovered at a distance, pretending to check their phones but glancing toward the bench. They'd heard the rumors. On Facebook, local news, even Reddit. Something about an old Marine and a promise made in war. By 10:15 a.m., a small crowd had gathered. Some were veterans themselves. Some brought their kids. And one woman, the same one who'd once filed a complaint, stood at the edge of the lawn, silent now, holding her son's hand. Walter didn't look around. He just stared at the path that led from the parking lot, eyes fixed, shoulders square, like a soldier standing guard. And then, a distant rumble. Not thunder, not traffic, but the low growl of engines. 6 of them. From behind the tall hedges near the entrance, a convoy rolled in. Not military vehicles, but minivans, pickups, an old RV with faded paint, and a Marine Corps flag taped in the window. Doors opened, and one by one, they stepped out. Men in their 70s and 80s. Some in full-dress blues, others in wrinkled polos embroidered with unit patches. One man came on a walker. Another was helped down from the RV in a wheelchair. But they came. 8 of them. Each one had traveled across states, from Arizona, Montana, Kentucky. Some hadn't seen each other in decades. And now they walked or rolled toward the bench. Walter stood. His cane trembled slightly in his hand. The first man to reach him, a tall, thin figure with a scar running down his temple, saluted. Walter returned it. Then they embraced. One by one, the rest joined in. Tears came. From the men, from the onlookers, from Kevin the groundskeeper, who had called in sick just to be there. Someone began to clap. Then others joined in. But Walter raised his hand gently and said, "Please, today isn't about us, it's about them." He opened the wooden box and laid it on the bench. Inside, a folded flag, 12 dog tags on a silver chain, and 12 letters sealed in plastic. One of the younger veterans, maybe a son or grandson of one of the original unit, read aloud a name. Private First Class Samuel Cruz, KIA, July 15th, 1969. They paused, saluted, whispered a private word, then the next name, and the next. Each man took turns, and as they did, the park grew quiet. Joggers stopped. Traffic hushed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a roll call of the fallen. 55 years later, but never too late. After the final name, Walter sat again. This time, not alone. This time, surrounded by those who remembered. A local reporter tried to approach with a microphone. Walter waved her off politely. "No story here," he said. "Just brothers keeping a promise." But the world had already heard. By nightfall, photos of the gathering flooded social media. Second recon. Promise kept Semper Fi thousands shared the moment. Veterans across the country posted tributes. A Marine general even issued a public statement. "This is who we are. Not the medals, not the uniforms, the promise." Back in Millstone Park, the bench remained. And so did the people. Long after the veterans left, visitors lingered. Not to speak, but to remember. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond Millstone Park. The local news aired a 3-minute segment that evening, just a quiet montage, old men in uniform, a weathered bench, dog tags glinting in the sun, no dramatic voiceover, no background music, just a title, The Promise Kept. And that silence spoke louder than any headline. Within 24 hours, the footage had been picked up by major networks, CNN, Fox, NPR. Even the Pentagon released a short statement acknowledging the gathering. Honor isn't found in the halls of power, but on the ground where brothers remember brothers. And at the center of it all was Walter Briggs, the man they once tried to remove. The same city official who'd filed the initial complaint quietly resigned. And the Parks Department, they issued a formal apology. Then they did something unexpected. They installed a bronze plaque beside the bench. Not large, not flashy, just enough. It read, "In honor of 2nd Recon, USM, and every promise that survived the battlefield, July 15th, 1969, forever remembered." Below it in smaller letters, "Reserved for memory, for silence, for those who wait." That same week, the mayor called Walter personally, offered to name the entire south section of the park after his unit. Walter politely declined. "The bench is enough," he said. "They never wanted fanfare, just a place." The outpouring didn't stop. Letters poured in, from high school students, retired generals, mothers of soldiers lost in action. One note stood out. It came from a young Marine stationed in Okinawa. "Sir, I didn't know your story until today. I never met your brothers, but I wanted you to know. I sat on a bench this morning. I read their names out loud, and I promised. I'll remember too." Veterans groups across the country began sharing stories of their own reunions, forgotten vows, and long-lost comrades. And in Millstone Park, something subtle changed. People no longer walked past the bench. They paused. Some left flowers. Some touched the plaque gently. A few even sat. Not for long, just long enough to breathe and listen. Kevin, the groundskeeper who'd first spoken to Walter, asked him one day, "How many times have you met like this?" Walter smiled. "Every 5 years. We started with 12. Now we're 9. And next time—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Kevin nodded, quietly making a decision. He started writing the names down, dates, stories, details, because someday someone would need to remember, and someone else would need to tell it right. Even the woman who once complained brought her son to the park again. This time she introduced herself, apologized, and asked Walter if he would tell her boy what it meant to serve. Walter did, not with war stories, but with one sentence. "It means keeping your word, even if no one else remembers you made it." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight in those words. That weekend, a group of teenagers came by. They sat on the grass nearby and played taps from a phone speaker. Not loudly, just enough. Walter tipped his cap to them, and when he stood to leave that evening, Kevin asked softly, "Will you be back tomorrow?" Walter smiled, eyes twinkling. "Of course. It's a public park, isn't it?" Summer turned to fall. The days grew shorter, the air a little colder, but every morning, just after the sun peeked over the trees, Walter Briggs still took his seat on that same bench. Not every day was easy. Some mornings his knees locked, some days the ache in his back begged him to stay home. But he came anyway, not out of habit, but out of duty. He never called it grief. He never called it pain. To him, it was a kind of presence. Each time he sat, he felt them beside him, the voices of 12 young men, frozen in memory, laughing, teasing, daring him to be late. And so, he was never late. One afternoon in October, the bench sat empty. People noticed. Kevin waited an hour, then 2. By the end of the day, the bench had flowers on it. Unprompted, someone left a folded flag. Someone else placed a single MRE meal with a note. "You waited. Now we remember." Walter had passed away peacefully that morning, in his sleep. A folded photograph of his unit beside his bed, his dress cap resting on the nightstand. There was no big funeral, but the park filled anyway. Hundreds came, veterans, students, city workers, strangers who only knew the story. A Marine honor guard played taps beneath the elm tree. And the bench. It wasn't just a bench anymore. It became a living monument, not to war, not to politics, but to promises kept, brothers remembered, and the quiet power of showing up year after year when no one else does. To this day, the plaque remains. To this day, people sit, breathe, reflect, and every July 15th, without fail, someone lays out 12 dog tags and reads each name, slowly, clearly, as if they're still listening, because maybe they are.